At my mom's birthday, my brother's son dumped soda in my lap and shouted, "Grandma says you don't belong here." Stay close to the end, because what happened after that moment will shock you. The party was loud, full of laughter and music, but I already felt out of place the second I walked in. My mother, Denise, barely glanced my way when I handed her the gift I bought with my own paycheck. She accepted it like I was a stranger on the street, then turned back to smile at my brother, Trayvon, who had arrived empty-handed yet received all her warmth. I tried to swallow the familiar sting, telling myself I could survive one night. But then it happened. My nephew Micah came running with a soda in his hand. Before I could react, he poured it straight into my lap. The cold liquid soaked through my dress, and the whole room gasped. Micah laughed and shouted, "Grandma says you don't belong here." The words cut sharper than the soda's chill. He didn't come up with that on his own. He repeated what he had heard, what my mother whispered about me behind my back. I sat frozen for a second, staring at the sticky mess on my lap, my ears burning with humiliation. My mother didn't rush to help me. She didn't even scold him. She just shook her head like I was the problem again. My brother chuckled under his breath, trying to cover it with a cough, but I saw it. That little smirk. He had always loved watching me get knocked down, because it kept him shining as the golden child. I clenched my fists under the table, fighting back tears, because crying in front of them would give them exactly what they wanted. "Enough," I whispered to myself. I pushed my chair back, the legs scraping loud against the floor. Everyone turned to look at me, but no one offered me a napkin, no one offered me kindness. My own family watched me stand there, dripping soda, like I was an intruder in their house. I grabbed my purse and said nothing. No yelling, no explanations. Just silence. I walked to the door with my head high, though inside I was burning. Trayvon called after me, "Don't be so dramatic, Aaliyah. It's just a joke." A joke. That's what they called it. But as I stepped outside into the cool night air, I finally admitted the truth to myself. It wasn't just a joke. It wasn't just soda. It was years of being unwanted, years of being blamed, years of being told I was less. I wiped at the sticky stain on my dress and whispered, "That was the last straw." And deep down, I knew this time I wouldn't just walk away. I was done chasing their love. This time, they were going to see exactly who I was, and they weren't ready for it. Growing up in the Grant household was like living in two different worlds under the same roof. Trayvon lived in the world of sunlight, and I lived in the shadows. From the moment I could remember, my mother Denise made it clear who her favorite was. Trayvon, the golden child, could do no wrong. If he forgot to clean up after himself, she laughed and called him busy and brilliant. If I left so much as a cup on the counter, she'd scold me for being careless and lazy. I used to watch as she slipped money into Trayvon's pocket before he left the house. "For lunch, baby," she'd say with a smile, smoothing his shirt like he was still a little boy. I never got those quiet gestures of love. If I asked for help, even just a few dollars, she would sigh and say, "You need to learn responsibility, Aaliyah. Not everything will be handed to you." I learned early that I had to work for every single thing I owned, while Trayvon was celebrated for simply existing. The smallest mistakes became mountains for me. Once, I accidentally broke a glass cup while washing dishes. It slipped from my hand and shattered on the kitchen floor. Denise's face turned hard, and she yelled at me for 10 straight minutes about being reckless and ungrateful. The punishment was no television for 2 weeks. A few days later, Trayvon came home with a dent in her car after borrowing it without asking. She sighed, gave him a hug, and said, "Boys will be boys." The unfairness wasn't just obvious, it was exhausting. I felt like I was running in circles, desperate for crumbs of approval that never came. I kept asking myself what I was doing wrong, why my own mother couldn't look at me the way she looked at him. It wasn't just favoritism, it was deeper. When our father walked out, I was only 7 years old. Denise cried for weeks, but soon her grief turned into something sharper. I became the mirror she didn't want to face. She poured her disappointment, her anger, and her bitterness into me. If I spoke too loudly, she snapped that I sounded like my father. If I stayed quiet, she accused me of sulking just like him. No matter what I did, I reminded her of the man who left, and I paid the price for his absence. Still, a part of me clung to hope. Even as I grew older, even as I worked hard and built my independence, a little girl inside me longed for her warmth. I imagined one day she'd turn to me and say she was proud. I wanted that hug, that smile, that softness she always saved for Trayvon. But that day never came. The older I got, the clearer it became. Her love had conditions I could never meet. And yet, I kept waiting, like a child holding out her hands for rain in a desert sky. The morning after the party, my phone buzzed before I had even poured myself a cup of coffee. Trayvon's name flashed across the screen. I thought about ignoring it, but I knew he wouldn't stop until I picked up. With a deep breath, I answered. Really, Aaliyah? His voice came sharp, full of irritation. You couldn't stay one night without causing a scene? Mom was humiliated when you stormed out like that. I sat there in silence for a second, gripping the phone tighter. Humiliated? I was the one drenched in soda, mocked in front of everyone. Yet somehow, in his eyes, I was the villain. Trayvon, I finally said, keeping my tone steady. Your son dumped a drink on me and shouted that Mom says I don't belong. And you think I'm the one who embarrassed her. He scoffed. Micah's a kid. He doesn't know what he's saying. You should have laughed it off instead of making a big deal about it. Mom didn't mean anything by it. The words hit me harder than the soda had. They weren't even denying it. They weren't even pretending Micah made it up. They admitted he was repeating what he had heard. But somehow, I was supposed to brush it aside. Later that evening, my mother herself called. Her tone was softer, but no less cutting. Aaliyah, she said, I don't know why you're always so sensitive. You know Micah's just playful. You embarrassed me in front of the whole family by leaving like that. Everyone was asking where you went. I pressed the phone to my ear and stared at the ceiling, feeling the same ache I'd carried for years. Mom, I said slowly, he said I don't belong here. He said you told him that. She didn't even flinch. You always twist my words. What I meant was, sometimes you isolate yourself, and the family doesn't understand you. If you took things less seriously, we'd all get along better. There it was again. My pain brushed aside like it was nothing. My humiliation turned into my fault. They always had a way of flipping the story until I was left questioning myself. But this time I felt something shift inside me. As Trayvon's scolding echoed in my mind and my mother's excuses filled the silence, I realized the truth that had always been waiting for me. My feelings had never mattered to them. No matter how much I explained, no matter how calm or reasonable I tried to be, I would always be the problem in their story. For years, I kept trying. I bent myself into shapes I thought would please them. I worked harder, stayed quieter, even smiled through their sharpest words, all because I wanted to belong. I wanted to be loved the way Trayvon was. But sitting there, phone still in my hand, I finally understood. Chasing their approval was like chasing smoke. I would never catch it, and it was slowly choking me. That night, I made a quiet promise to myself. I was done. Done begging for scraps of affection. Done proving my worth to people who chose not to see it. For the first time, I chose me. It was a quiet Sunday afternoon when my cousin Keandra stopped by. We sat in my small apartment, sipping iced tea and catching up about work, family, and life. Keandra always had a way of talking fast, her stories spilling out like water from a broken faucet. I liked it. It distracted me from the storm that had been brewing inside me since the party. She was laughing about something her little sister had done when she said, almost casually, "Girl, it's crazy how Aunt Denise and Trayvon handled your grandma's estate. The whole family still whispers about it." I froze, my glass halfway to my lips. "Wait," I said slowly. "What estate?" Keandra blinked, realizing too late what she had just revealed. She shifted uncomfortably in her chair. "Oh, I thought you knew." My stomach tightened. "Knew what, Keandra? What are you talking about?" She sighed, glancing down at her hands. "When Grandma passed, she left everything split between you and Trayvon. The house, some savings, a few investments. But Aunt Denise said you didn't want to be involved, so it all went to Trayvon." The words hit me like a punch to the chest. I set my glass down hard, tea sloshing over the rim. "That's not true. Nobody ever told me about a will. Nobody told me anything." Keandra's eyes widened. You didn't know? Oh my God, Aaliyah. I thought you just chose to walk away from it." I shook my head, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. All those years of wondering why I was always left out, why Trayvon lived comfortably while I struggled paycheck to paycheck, suddenly snapped into focus. This wasn't just favoritism. This wasn't just my mother overlooking me. This was theft. This was betrayal, carefully wrapped in silence. "Do you know where the papers are?" I asked, my voice sharper than I intended. Keandra hesitated, then nodded. "The lawyer. I think his name is Mr. Whitman. He handled the estate." "Aaliyah, I swear, I didn't mean to let it slip. Please don't get me in trouble." But I barely heard her. My mind was racing, every memory of my mother dismissing me, Every time Trayvon bragged about his easy life, every cold glance from family gatherings, it all burned together into one blazing truth. They had lied to me. They had stolen what was mine and left me scraping by, wondering why I was never enough. For a moment, the room seemed to tilt. My hands trembled as I pressed them against my knees. Then slowly, the shock hardened into something else, something heavier, sharper. Rage. It wasn't an accident. It wasn't a misunderstanding. My own family had deliberately erased me from my grandmother's legacy, and they thought I would never find out. But I had found out, and now they had no idea what was coming. The next morning, I woke up with a new fire inside me. For once, I wasn't just going to sit back and swallow what they had done. My grandmother had wanted me to have an equal share, and Denise and Trayvon had stolen it in silence. That thought alone gave me the strength to do what I had avoided for years. I picked up the phone and called the lawyer Keandra had mentioned. "Whitman and Associates," a calm voice answered. I asked for Mr. Whitman, introduced myself, and after a brief pause, he said, "Aaliyah Grant." "Yes, I remember your grandmother's case. How can I help you?" My heart pounded, but I forced my voice to stay steady. "I need to know about my grandmother's will. Did she leave anything to me?" There was a rustle of papers on the other end. Then his voice came back, clear and firm. "Yes. She left her estate split evenly between you and your brother. 50-50. That was her final wish." For a moment, the world went quiet around me. I gripped the phone tighter, my pulse racing. "Then why didn't I get anything?" He hesitated before answering. "Your mother and brother handled the probate. They told me you didn't want to be involved. Legally, unless you contested it then, the assets were released. But make no mistake, you were entitled. You still are, though it may take some legal steps." I hung up the phone and sat in stunned silence. The confirmation was both crushing and electrifying. They really had erased me from everything. And yet, I still had rights. My grandmother hadn't forgotten me. She had loved me enough to leave me half of everything, and Denise and Trayvon had stolen it out of greed. For the first time in years, I didn't feel powerless. I felt dangerous, but I knew better than to rush into battle. If I confronted them right away, they would twist the story like they always did, make me look bitter, ungrateful, unstable. No, this time I wouldn't play by their rules. This time I would be patient. I started to plan. Quietly, carefully. I requested copies of the will and legal documents from Mr. Whitman. I read them over and over until I knew them by heart. Each line felt like a weapon placed in my hands. At night, I imagined their faces when I revealed everything. I pictured the smug look falling from Trayvon's eyes, the false sweetness draining from Denise's smile. I wanted the whole family to hear the truth at once, with no way for them to lie their way out of it. So I waited. I smiled when Denise called, pretending to play along. I stayed calm when Trayvon sent smug texts about his new car, bought with money that should have been partly mine. Inside, I was sharpening my blade. They thought I was the quiet, forgotten daughter. But soon, they would learn I was the storm they never saw coming. The smell of roasted chicken and collard greens filled the air as I walked into my mother's house. The dining room buzzed with laughter from cousins, aunts, and uncles I hadn't seen in months. Everyone seemed warm and cheerful, except for the two people whose approval I had stopped chasing. Denise sat at the head of the table like a queen, her eyes narrowing when she saw me walk in. Trayvon leaned back in his chair, smirking like he already owned the night. I held my purse close, inside it the neatly folded copies of my grandmother's will. My heart pounded, but on the outside I looked calm. I greeted my relatives with hugs and polite smiles, taking my seat at the far end of the table. Denise's voice cut through the chatter. "Well, look who decided to show up. I wasn't sure if you'd grace us with your presence after the little tantrum at my birthday." A few cousins chuckled awkwardly. I forced a smile. I didn't want to miss dinner. Family's important, right? Trayvon let out a soft laugh. "Family is important, but it takes effort, sis. You've never been good at that. Always dramatic, always walking away." I said nothing. I picked up my fork and focused on my plate, letting their words float past me. Every jab, every smirk, they were baiting me, waiting for me to explode like I used to. But not tonight. Halfway through the meal, Micah piped up, his little voice carrying across the table. "Grandma said Aunt Leah doesn't belong here. Why is she even at dinner?" He giggled, thinking it was funny. The room went silent for a beat, then Denise forced a laugh. "Kids repeat everything they hear, don't they?" she said lightly, brushing it off. but I saw the flash of pride in her eyes. She didn't regret the words. She enjoyed hearing them thrown at me. My cousins shifted uncomfortably. An aunt coughed into her napkin. I felt their eyes on me, waiting for me to defend myself or storm out. That was my role in this family, wasn't it? The outsider, the overreactor, the one who couldn't handle a joke. I placed my fork down slowly, wiped my hands on my napkin, and looked at Micah with a soft smile. Sweetheart, I do belong here. More than you know. Then I turned back to my plate, calm as ever. Denise frowned, confused by my composure. Trayvon rolled his eyes and muttered something under his breath. They thought they had won again. They thought I was swallowing the humiliation, shrinking back into silence. But inside, I felt steady, powerful even. The papers in my bag were heavy with truth, and I wasn't afraid anymore. Tonight wasn't about defending myself. Tonight was about patience. I let them talk, let them laugh, let them play their little game. I sipped my water, smiled politely, and waited. Because the moment was coming soon. The moment when their perfect little act would shatter, and everyone at that table would finally see them for who they really were. I waited until the plates were cleared and the table filled with the low hum of conversation. My pulse was steady now, no longer racing. I had rehearsed this moment in my mind for days, and I knew exactly what I was going to do. I set my glass down gently, then tapped my fork against it. The clinking sound drew every eye to me. "Excuse me," I said, standing tall. "I need everyone's attention for a moment." The room grew quiet, though I could see Denise's face tighten and Trayvon's smirk deepen. "What now?" Trayvon muttered. "Another scene?" I ignored him and reached into my bag. The crisp papers felt almost electric in my hands. "I'm not here to argue. I'm here to tell the truth, something that's been hidden from me and from all of you." I laid the documents on the table, sliding them into the center where everyone could see. "These are copies of Grandma's will. She wanted her estate divided equally between Trayvon and me, 50% each. But I was never told. I was cut out, lied to, erased. And my mother and brother made sure you all believed it was my choice to walk away." Gasps filled the room. An aunt leaned forward, eyes wide. "Is that true?" she whispered. Denise's smile faltered, but she quickly straightened in her chair. "Aaliyah, honey, you don't understand. You've always been so sensitive. We didn't tell you because you weren't ready to handle the responsibility. We were protecting you." I let out a bitter laugh. "Protecting me? You stole from me. You stole what Grandma wanted me to have, and then you painted me as the selfish one." Trayvon shot up from his seat, his voice booming across the table. "This is ridiculous. You've been nothing but ungrateful your whole life. Mom carried this family after Dad left, and you're going to stand here and accuse her of being a thief." His face was red, his fists clenched, but I didn't flinch. "You can yell all you want," I said calmly, meeting his glare. "The documents don't lie. Grandma loved me just as much as she loved you. She wanted me to have my share. But you both decided your greed was more important than her last wish." The relatives murmured among themselves, some shaking their heads in disbelief, others glaring at Denise and Trayvon. The golden image they had built was cracking right in front of them. Denise pressed a hand to her chest, her voice trembling. "Aaliyah, how could you do this to your own mother? After everything I've done for you." "No," I cut in sharply. "Don't twist this. You didn't do it for me. You did it for yourself. You lied, you manipulated, and you raised your grandson to repeat your cruelty. I won't carry your shame anymore." For the first time, the room wasn't looking at me with pity or judgment. They were looking at Denise and Trayvon with disgust. And I stood there, steady, refusing to let them rewrite the story one more time. Tonight, the truth belonged to me. The dining room erupted the moment I finished speaking. Voices overlapped, sharp questions flying like arrows. Aunts and uncles leaned forward, staring at the papers as if they were holding burning coals. Cousins whispered to each other, disbelief etched across their faces. The golden shine Denise and Trayvon had worn for years was peeling away in front of everyone's eyes. "This can't be true," one uncle said, shaking his head. "Denise, did you really hide this from your own daughter?" Denise stammered, her hands trembling as she tried to gather herself. "You don't understand. I did what was best for the family." "No," another cousin cut her off. "You did what was best for Trayvon. You've been spoiling him since we were kids. And now this. Stealing from Aaliyah?" Trayvon's face was red with fury. "You all don't know what you're talking about. She's twisting things. Mom and I." But no one wanted to hear him. His protests were drowned out by the rising tide of disappointment and disgust. For once, the room wasn't nodding along to his words. They weren't laughing at his jokes or admiring his charm. They saw him for what he was. Across the table, Micah sat frozen, his little hands gripping his fork. His wide eyes darted from me to his father to his grandmother. "Dad," he said softly, "is it true? Grandma told me Analia didn't belong here." His voice cracked, confused and small. "But she does." The silence that followed was heavier than any shout. Trayvon tried to speak, but the boy's gaze pierced him in a way no one else's could. Denise reached out, but Micah pulled his hand back, shrinking in his chair. The lies he had repeated with pride now tasted bitter on his tongue. My mother's mask finally broke. She stood, reaching across the table as if to grab me back into her control. "Aaliyah, please. Don't leave like this. We can talk privately, we can fix this." But her voice shook with desperation, not authority. The queen had lost her crown, and she knew it. I gathered my purse, sliding the empty chair away from the table. My movements were calm, deliberate. "There's nothing to fix," I said quietly. "You made your choices. And now everyone knows." "Please," she whispered again, her eyes glossy with tears that came too late. I didn't answer. I didn't even look back at Trayvon, who was still sputtering excuses, his voice cracking with panic. I walked out of that dining room with my head high, my heart strangely light. Behind me, the voices of my relatives rose again, but this time, they weren't aimed at me. For years, I had carried the weight of their rejection, believing I was the problem. But as I stepped into the night air, leaving Denise's house behind me, I finally understood. I had never been the one who didn't belong. They had, and I was done letting them decide my worth. The legal process took months, but each day that passed felt like a brick lifted from my shoulders. For the first time in my life, I wasn't on the defensive. I was the one holding the truth backed by law. When the final judgment arrived, confirming my full rights to my grandmother's estate, I sat in silence for a long time, letting the weight of victory settle in. It wasn't about money. It was about dignity, about reclaiming the legacy that had been denied me for so long. The house was the first thing I turned my attention to. The old place where my grandmother had once lived carried years of neglect, its walls sagging with dust and sorrow. But as I walked through it, I didn't see decay. I saw possibility. I saw warm evenings by the fireplace, photographs lining the mantel, the echo of laughter replacing silence. Renovation became more than construction. It became healing. Keandra was with me every step of the way, sketching out plans, painting walls, and sometimes just sitting with me in the middle of the rubble when emotions overwhelmed me. "This is yours," she would remind me, handing me a brush or hammer. "No one can take it anymore." We pulled down peeling wallpaper and discovered wood beams hidden underneath, strong and beautiful, just waiting to be revealed. I felt the same about myself, buried under years of shame and rejection, but still standing, still capable of becoming something whole. Slowly, the house transformed. Fresh paint brightened the walls, new furniture filled the rooms, and the garden my grandmother once tended bloomed again under careful hands. Neighbors stopped by, not to gossip or criticize, but to welcome me, to share stories of how kind my grandmother had been, how proud she would be now. For the first time in my life, I wasn't the outsider peeking through windows. I was part of something real. Nights in the renovated home felt different. The silence wasn't heavy anymore. It was peaceful. I would curl up on the porch with Keandra, sipping tea as the crickets sang. We talked about the future, not the past. About dreams, not wounds. And somewhere along the way, I realized I no longer felt the gnawing hunger for Denise's approval. The girl inside me who had once begged for a smile, for a scrap of validation, was gone. In her place stood a woman who had carved out her own space, her own worth. I didn't hate Denise anymore, not because she deserved forgiveness, but because I refused to let her linger inside me. My life was bigger than her lies, brighter than her shadows. Standing at the gate of the house one evening, I whispered into the wind, "Thank you, Grandma. I'm home." And for the first time, I truly believed it. Betrayal, I learned, doesn't cut deepest because of the act itself, but because of who delivers it. Strangers can wound you, but when it's family, the pain reaches into places you didn't even know could break. For years, I carried that weight. The sting of Denise's dismissals, the sting of Trayvon's smug superiority, the sting of being told over and over that I didn't belong. It sat heavy on my shoulders, shaping the way I saw myself, shaping the silence I kept. But now, sitting here on the porch of the house that was always meant to be part mine, I feel something I never thought I'd hold: peace. The walls behind me glow with warmth, not from memories of what they once were, but from what I've made them. Every brick, every nail, every stroke of paint carries a piece of me reclaiming my worth. This home is more than an inheritance. It's proof that truth doesn't just survive lies, it outlasts them. I don't forgive Denise. I don't forgive Trayvon. Some things don't deserve soft endings, and I refuse to erase what they did. Forgiveness, I realized, isn't necessary to move on. What's necessary is letting go, not of the truth, but of their grip on me. They can keep their bitterness, their reputation in shambles, their guilt. None of it belongs to me anymore. The revenge I dreamed of didn't come with shouting or fire. It came quietly, with documents, with proof, with dignity. It came with me standing in front of them and refusing to shrink. It came with me walking away afterward, not broken but whole. That was the sharpest blade I could carry, the truth itself. Keandra told me once, while we painted the living room walls, that some battles aren't won by crushing your enemies, but by outgrowing them. I didn't understand then, but I do now. Denise and Trayvon are trapped in the same cycle of manipulation and favoritism that kept me small for years. I've stepped outside of it. They can spin their stories, make excuses, or wallow in shame. It changes nothing. The legacy my grandmother left was not just land or a house, but a chance at freedom. Tonight, the air is cool, carrying the faint scent of the garden in bloom. I sit with a blanket over my knees, listening to the crickets hum, watching the moonlight stretch across the porch floorboards. For the first time in my life, I'm not looking over my shoulder for approval or searching for scraps of love that were never given. I'm here fully in a space that is mine. And in that quiet, I realize the battle is over. The betrayal still stings, but it no longer defines me. The truth did what I couldn't force them to do. It set me free. I lean back in the chair, breathe deeply, and let the silence settle. I claimed my place without them. And that is enough. Do you think Aaliyah made the right choice by cutting ties and finding peace on her own? Or should she have tried once more to mend things with her family? Share your thoughts in the comments. I'd really like to hear your perspective. And if you enjoy stories like this, don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss a new one.